The moment Bella Carter stepped through the towering gates of the Blackwell estate, she knew nothing about this day would be ordinary. The mansion loomed like a fortress, its marble facade gleaming in the morning sun, and the perfectly trimmed gardens whispered wealth and power she had only glimpsed in magazines. She adjusted the strap of her simple uniform, feeling the weight of both excitement and nerves settle in her chest. This was not just a job, it was a chance to step into a world that had always felt just out of reach. From the moment she entered the grand foyer, her eyes were drawn to the man who commanded the room without even trying. Dominic Blackwell, billionaire and enigma, stood by the sweeping staircase, his sharp gaze surveying every corner of the house with a precision that made her stomach twist. He was imposing, tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating an authority that made most people shrink under his stare. But Bella noticed something in the way he paused for a fraction of a second when their eyes met. A subtle recognition, a flicker of curiosity. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but commanding, "you will follow my instructions carefully. This estate runs like clockwork and I expect no mistakes." Bella swallowed hard, nodding politely, her hands clasped in front of her. There was something both intimidating and magnetic about him, a tension she couldn't explain. And then it happened. The teacup in her hands wobbled, slipped, and crashed to the floor. Heart racing, she braced for a scolding. Dominic's gaze softened ever so slightly. "Careful," he said, reaching out to steady her hands. It was just a moment, almost imperceptible, but Bella felt a spark she couldn't name. Something told her that behind that stern exterior, a different side of him waited, one she might just discover. She smiled nervously, setting the teacup upright. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, she was already intrigued. The next morning, Bella arrived earlier than usual, determined to prove herself. She had been careful with the teacup incident, replaying Dominic's subtle reaction in her mind. There had been something in that glance, a flicker of intrigue she couldn't shake. Today, she told herself, she would show him she was more than just careful hands. She had grit, determination, and a mind that could keep up with his fast-paced world. Dominic appeared as if summoned by her thoughts, standing silently at the top of the grand staircase. "Miss Carter," he said, voice steady but unreadable, "I need you to organize my personal library. Every book in its proper place. Attention to detail is mandatory." Bella blinked at the task, glancing at the towering shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, some older than she could imagine. "Yes, sir," she replied, masking both awe and a hint of nerves. Hours passed, the air thick with quiet focus. Bella dusted and arranged, sometimes pausing to admire the craftsmanship of the room, while Dominic observed from the doorway. His presence was steady, not intrusive, yet she felt the weight of his gaze on her back. At one point, she struggled with a particularly heavy book and Dominic stepped closer. Without a word, he lifted it with ease and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed for a moment, a fleeting, electric contact. Bella's heart fluttered and she quickly focused on her task, cheeks warm. She noticed a rare softness in his eyes, a break from the usual strictness that kept everyone else at a distance. There was respect there, something unspoken, and it made her feel both confident and strangely connected to him. When the task was done, Dominic nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement of her effort. Bella realized it wasn't just about cleaning or organizing, it was about earning his trust, piece by piece. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of a connection that would change both their worlds. Bella had begun to settle into a rhythm at the Blackwell estate, learning the routines, anticipating Dominic's needs, and quietly navigating the mansion's grandeur. Yet despite her growing confidence, she couldn't shake the nervous energy that seemed to gather whenever Dominic was near. There was a gravity to him, a presence that demanded attention, and somehow, it made her feel both cautious and exhilarated at the same time. That afternoon, while dusting the shelves in the library, Bella's hand slipped, and a small decorative vase toppled over, shattering on the marble floor. She gasped, expecting an explosion of anger. Her heart raced, her palms slick with nervous sweat. But instead of Dominic's usual stern reprimand, she heard a low chuckle behind her. She turned, startled, to see him leaning casually against the doorway, a small, rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Careful, Miss Carter," he said, amusement in his eyes. "I'd hate to see you upset yourself over a broken vase." Bella blinked, caught off guard. Was he laughing? She felt the tension in her chest ease, and before she knew it, she was laughing too. Nervous at first, then genuine, a sound that seemed to surprise both of them. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel so imposing. Dominic stepped closer, tilting his head slightly as if studying her. "You have a good laugh," he said softly. Unexpected. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air seemed to shimmer with unspoken understanding. In that moment, Bella saw not just the ruthless billionaire everyone feared, but a man capable of joy, capable of connection. And Dominic, in turn, noticed her resilience, her ability to find light in unexpected places. By the time the laughter faded, a quiet comfort had settled between them, a subtle promise that their relationship could be more than formalities and instructions. A spark had been ignited, small but undeniable, one that neither of them could ignore. The sky had turned a steel gray by midday, and the first drops of rain began tapping against the tall windows of the Blackwell estate. Bella had just finished tidying the greenhouse, her hands damp from wiping down the leaves, when she heard the sudden patter of rain growing heavier. She glanced outside and realized the storm was moving fast. She wouldn't make it back to the main house without getting drenched. Before panic could set in, a voice spoke behind her, calm yet commanding. "Miss Carter, wait here." Dominic stepped into the greenhouse, holding a thick wool blanket. "You'll catch cold if you run through the rain." Bella's cheeks warmed at the gesture. Thank you, sir," she replied softly, taking the blanket from him. They sat on a bench among the ferns and orchids, the storm outside casting a rhythmic, soothing sound over them. The greenhouse smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the tension that often filled the mansion. Bella shivered slightly, and Dominic instinctively draped the blanket over her shoulders. Their shoulders brushed, and she felt the warmth of his arm near hers. Neither spoke immediately, but the silence was comfortable, filled with something that went beyond words. For the first time, Bella noticed the quiet gentleness in him, the way he didn't need to fill the space with authority or commands. She leaned slightly closer, just enough that their arms touched more fully, and Dominic didn't pull away. A soft smile played at his lips. "You seem different when it rains," he said almost to himself. Bella laughed quietly. "I think the rain brings out the softer side of everyone," she teased, heart fluttering at the subtle closeness. By the time the storm passed, a new understanding had been forged between them, a small, unspoken bond. And as they walked back to the mansion, side by side, wrapped in the shared warmth of the blanket and each other's presence, Bella felt certain that this was just the beginning of something deeper. The mansion was quiet that evening, the usual hum of staff long gone, leaving only the soft ticking of the grand clock in the hallway. Bella carried a tray of tea into Dominic's study, expecting him to be buried in paperwork as usual. Instead, she found him staring out the window, shoulders tense, his usual composure replaced by a weariness she rarely saw. "Dominic?" she asked softly, stepping closer. "Is everything all right?" He didn't turn immediately, letting the question hang in the air. Finally he exhaled, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said, his voice tight. But Bella, having noticed the rare cracks in his armor, sensed otherwise. Without another word, she set the tray down and moved closer. "You don't have to face everything alone," she said gently, her hand brushing his shoulder. "Even someone like you deserves support." For a moment, Dominic said nothing, but the tension in his posture softened. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he turned toward her. Bella saw the loneliness in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely revealed. And without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped him in a comforting hug. The contact was brief, yet heavy with meaning. Dominic stiffened at first, then relaxed as if the simple act of being held allowed him a momentary release from the weight of the world. Bella felt the warmth of his body, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, and she understood that trust was being given in that quiet embrace. When they finally pulled apart, he looked at her with a softness that made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Bella," he whispered. "I appreciate that more than you know." In that quiet study, surrounded by books and the fading glow of evening, a deeper connection formed. A bond built on trust, understanding, and the quiet power of simply being there for someone. Bella realized then that the walls around Dominic's heart were not impenetrable. They were just waiting for someone patient enough to care. The morning sun glinted off the polished floors of the Blackwell estate as Bella dusted the chandelier in the grand hallway. She had barely finished when Dominic appeared, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look even more commanding than usual. He held a small envelope in one hand, and his expression was unreadable. "Miss Carter," he said, voice steady, "I need a companion for tonight's charity gala. I expect discretion, elegance, and your usual impeccable presence." Bella blinked, momentarily stunned. A gala? With Dominic? She had imagined being in his world every day, but this invitation felt different. It was personal, almost intimate. She nodded, hiding her excitement. "Of course, sir," she replied, cheeks warming. That evening, Bella arrived in a simple yet elegant dress, her hair styled neatly, a soft glow to her cheeks. Dominic met her at the entrance of the gala, his eyes briefly scanning her from head to toe, and she felt a flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze. Throughout the evening, Bella kept close by his side, navigating conversations and formalities with grace. Yet it wasn't the grandeur of the event that captured her attention, it was Dominic. The way he stood protectively near her, the subtle attentiveness in his posture, the faint smile he allowed when he thought no one was watching. As soft music filled the room, Dominic extended a hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his tone almost gentle. Bella's heart leapt, and she took his hand without hesitation. They moved slowly across the dance floor, their steps in quiet harmony. No words were spoken, yet every glance, every brush of hands carried meaning. When their eyes met, Bella felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the room's heat, something far deeper, rooted in trust, admiration, and an unspoken connection. By the time the dance ended, she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer just the maid in Dominic's mansion. Tonight she had stepped closer to his heart. The garden was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns lining the winding paths. Bella had been tidying up the estate when she noticed Dominic stepping outside, his posture tense and his usual calm demeanor replaced by a rare heaviness. Without thinking, she followed, instinct guiding her to offer comfort rather than intrude. He didn't speak immediately, only walking along the cobblestone path with hands clasped behind his back. The cool night air carried the scent of roses and damp earth, a quiet sanctuary away from the mansion's strict formality. Bella hesitated for a moment before finally saying, "You look like you could use someone to talk to." Dominic stopped, his gaze softening when he saw her standing there. "Perhaps," he admitted quietly. "It's been a long day." They walked together in silence for a few moments, the sound of distant crickets and rustling leaves filling the space. Finally, Dominic let out a long sigh and turned toward her. Without warning, Bella stepped closer and gently rested her hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, but one that carried warmth and reassurance. He didn't pull away. Instead, Dominic placed his arm lightly around her shoulders, and Bella leaned in naturally. Their closeness was comforting, no words were needed. She could feel the tension leave his body as he allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability, and in that quiet garden, the distance between them began to shrink. "Thank you for being here," he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard. Bella smiled, resting her head gently against his chest for a moment. As they continued their walk under the moonlight, a subtle understanding passed between them. Trust had been strengthened, and the bond they were building became undeniable. Bella realized that sometimes, comfort could speak louder than words, and Dominic seemed to feel the same. The study was quiet, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting warm light over the polished wood and scattered papers. Bella had been tidying the room when Dominic appeared, leaning casually against the doorway, but tonight he seemed different, less rigid, more open, as though the walls he always carried were beginning to crumble. "Bella," he began, his voice low, "stay for a moment. I want to talk." She nodded, curiosity mingling with a flutter of nerves. She had learned to read him, to notice the subtle shifts in his mood, and tonight, something told her this conversation would matter. They sat across from each other, a quiet distance between them, yet charged with an unspoken energy. Bella spoke first, sharing small dreams she had never voiced before, the kind of hopes that were simple yet deeply personal. She told him about her desire for a life filled with meaning, not just work, and how she hoped to leave a mark in the world. Dominic listened intently, his usual stern gaze softened. For the first time he admitted feelings he rarely shared with anyone. "I enjoy your presence more than I expected," he said quietly. "It's different, comforting. Even when I try not to notice it." Bella's chest warmed, a quiet thrill rising within her. She smiled gently, taking a cautious step closer. Dominic's eyes followed her, vulnerability flickering across his features. And then, almost instinctively, he opened his arms. The hug was slow, lingering, filled with meaning. Bella rested her head against his chest, feeling the steadiness of his heartbeat beneath her ear. It was more than a gesture, it was trust, acknowledgement, and a promise unspoken. Dominic's arms held her firmly, yet with care, and in that quiet moment, all the unvoiced words between them seemed to settle into something permanent. When they finally parted, their eyes met, and Bella realized that nothing about Dominic would ever be ordinary again. He had let her in, and in doing so, changed the rhythm of her heart. The mansion felt unusually tense that morning. Bella had overheard whispers from the staff, rumors about Dominic's reputation, the kind that painted him as cold and ruthless. She had known him as much more than the stories suggested, but the weight of gossip still pressed down on her. She found Dominic in his office, staring at a stack of business reports with a furrowed brow. His usual composure was tight, almost strained, and Bella could see that the rumors had reached him. He didn't look up when she entered, but she stepped closer anyway. "Dominic," she said softly, "people may talk, but I know who you really are. I see the person behind the walls." For a moment there was silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Then Dominic slowly lifted his gaze, and Bella saw a flicker of vulnerability she rarely witnessed. You trust me?" he asked quietly, almost incredulous. Bella nodded, stepping forward. "I trust you because I see you. Not the rumors, not the business empire, just you. And I care about you, everything you are, everything you've shown me." Dominic's eyes softened, and before either could speak again, he pulled her into a firm but gentle hug. Bella rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the tension leave him as he held her close. There was comfort in the embrace, a reassurance that even in the face of whispers and judgment, they had each other. They stood that way for several minutes, a silent promise exchanged through proximity and warmth. Bella realized that loyalty wasn't just about staying through the easy moments, it was about standing firm when the world threatened to misrepresent the ones you care for. And Dominic seemed to understand that too, as his arms tightened around her just slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that he valued her presence more than he had words to express. By the time they pulled apart, a quiet strength had formed between them, a bond that no gossip or rumor could shake. They had each other, and that was enough. The evening air was warm, carrying the faint scent of roses from the estate gardens. Dominic had arranged a small celebration in the mansion's grand hall, not for business, not for appearances, but for Bella. She entered, surprised to find candles flickering softly and a simple bouquet waiting on a table. The gesture made her heart swell. She realized then that this was no ordinary employer-employee interaction. Dominic stood at the far end of the room, waiting. His usual stern composure softened into something tender and personal. When their eyes met, Bella felt a flutter in her chest, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Tonight there were no walls, no formalities, just the two of them. "I wanted to thank you," Dominic said, his voice quiet but sincere. "For your presence, your trust, and for being you." Bella stepped closer, warmth spreading through her chest. "You've shown me a world I never thought I'd see," she said softly. "And you've made me feel seen, Dominic. Truly seen." Without another word, they closed the distance, and Dominic wrapped Bella in a hug that lingered longer than any before. It was steady, protective, and filled with the emotion they had both carried in silence for so long. Bella rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the comfort of his arms around her. "I think," Dominic murmured, "this is the start of something permanent." Bella smiled, letting the words settle. "Forever then," she whispered. As they held each other, the world outside seemed to fade away. There was only trust, understanding, and a connection that had grown through shared laughter, whispered confidences, and tender moments. In that embrace, they found their forever, not in grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the quiet certainty of being together. Tonight marked the beginning of a life built on respect, loyalty, and love. And as Bella and Dominic walked hand in hand toward the future, they knew that no challenge could undo the bond they had forged.